swept the nation like a virulent flu bug. But was it a bit of midsummer madness or the start of something big? Well, the man's in the studio with me now. Jacob Rees-Mogg, Conservative MP for North East Somerset. What lies behind Mogmentum, Mr. Rees-Mogg? Good morning.
Good morning, and thank you. I think a little summer fun. I think that the papers didn't have much to write about, and therefore my name got thrust to the fore by some splendid gentleman in Rotherham having Mogmentum tattooed on his chest, and that got everyone quite excited. But it's summer fun, summer fluff, and will fade.
Are you enjoying it?
Oh, it's great fun, yes, whilst it lasts. And of course it gives me the opportunity to come on programmes like this, and we will discuss political views and Brexit and things like that. And it helps give a platform for the arguments that I want to make.
And you'll take listeners' calls, and we'll come to those in just a second. Yes, indeed, we'll come to those in just a second, Mr. So, but where do your political ambitions lie? Do you want to one day be leader of the Conservative Party?
No, I have no wish to become the leader of the Conservative Party. I'm fully supporting Mrs. May. I think it's extremely important that we have the same leadership for this period in our country's history, that to make sure we get through Brexit properly and then go beyond that, so that we can get the benefits of Brexit, which will be freer trade, lower prices in the shops, will be control of our own borders and of our own regulations, and we need stability to get there. So I'm completely backing Mrs. May, and no one serious thinks that I am a credible candidate. So I would be either
Ever? Or currently?
Well, you're a serious person. You don't think I would ever be a serious candidate.
Well, never mind what I think. So I don't know if you told me Boris was going to be Foreign Secretary, I might have laughed at that idea.
But you're representative of serious and not unfriendly commentators. And I think that's the right view. I share that view.
OK. You mentioned control of our borders once we're in a post-Brexit Britain. There does seem to be a degree of concern, doubt, trepidation about how they will actually be put into place. Do you have an idea?
I'm concerned about the efficiency of the Home Office to take control of our borders, that if you look at figures on deportations, there are a number of people waiting deportation, that it doesn't seem to be an efficient and smooth process. There were complaints over the summer about some delays for people getting back into the country. The target for UK citizens getting back into the country is there shouldn't be any more than a 25-minute wait. Well, Tesco's does a good deal better in getting people through their queues. And I think the basic level of service that is provided is not good enough. And I find that some constituents have dealings with the Home Office in relation to immigration office policies is not as good as it ought to be. So my concern is not that we can't come up with a wonderful policy, which I think is pretty easy, but whether we can implement it. And I think that's going to be a real challenge for the government.
Let's go to some of the calls. That's what you're here for. Mr. Rees-Mogg, first up is Gary in Glasgow, and you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, Gary.
Yeah, good morning, Jacob.
Good morning.
Can I ask you, do you support the return of secular schools that were replaced in the 19th century by what is now an explosion of various publicly funded faith schools promoting a range of religious beliefs that can't all be true, can they, Jacob?
Well, I believe that parents should have choice about where they send their children to school. I think that's important. I think parents make much better choices for their children than bureaucrats in Whitehall do, and that if parents want a religious education for their children, that is something they ought to be allowed to choose. I'd also note that some religious schools, particularly the Anglican and the Catholic schools, get some of the best results of any schools in the country, and that is something which we should be pleased about.
Well, all parents want good schools, but have we got to fund special busing of pupils to non-religious schools because there isn't a non-religious school in their area?
Well, in North East Somerset, they the council used to fund taking children to the religious school of their choice, and they stopped doing that. So the issue of busing is a matter for local councils, and they have different policies across the country.
So overall in faith schools, Mr. Rees-Mogg, you support the idea?
I support the idea of faith schools.
Even though we've had some issues in cities such as Birmingham, where Islamic schools have become a little detached from the mainstream curriculum?
That is a matter of regulation, of inspection, of ensuring that things are done within the normal laws of the land and within the guidelines set down by the Department of Education. But to get rid of the enormously high-achieving Church of England and Catholic schools, and indeed Jewish schools,
yes,
because there are some schools that are go a bit further than perhaps is proper, is completely the wrong way around. You want to deal with the problem, not schools that are doing well.
But, I mean, you benefited from a great education and from informed parents, and that's fantastic. But in some instances, how healthy is it that a group of Jewish children only grew up with other Jewish children, or Catholic children, or Muslim children? How healthy is that in some inner city areas?
Well, isn't it for their parents to decide? Surely we sitting in here just off Leicester Square should not be deciding how parents bring up their children.
Are all parents responsible enough to make those decisions?
Oh, come on. Once you start saying the state can be more responsible than the individual, where do you draw the line? I mean, this is what's going on in Scotland, where they want to have a state-appointed person for every child in Scotland. That's the SNP's policy. And that seems to me deeply sinister. I believe parents have the primary responsibility, and the state should only step in if parents are incapable or are actually a risk to their children.
So what about a set of parents who want to send their 6-year-old boy to school in a dress?
Well, as it happens, I think that is a choice for the parents, and the school should be as accommodating as possible.
And the Christian parents of another boy in that class who take the boy out of that school and are going to sue the school as a result?
Well, we'll have to see what happens with the legal action, but I do think parents are entitled to home educate. That can be very successful, and I think is a sensible right to allow parents to have.
So both sets of parents are ineffectively... I mean, you would devolve a lot of power to the parents.
I would indeed. I don't know the details of that case.
Well, as broadly as I say, a 6-year-old boy goes to school in a dress sometimes, so a set of parents with a deep faith say, sorry, that's not for us, we're going to sue.
I've read about the case, but with so many of these things, until you know all the details, it can be difficult to pass judgment from afar. But I think that's why parents are so much more likely to know better than I can know on their behalf.
We've all tuned into your family. We all know about your children, and congratulations.
Thank you.
But you wouldn't have a problem if, I think it's 5 boys and 1 girl from memory.
Right.
Yes, if a pupil at one of your children's classes started dressing in the other gender. It wouldn't bother you at all.
I doubt I'd notice, to be perfectly honest.
What do you mean you wouldn't notice? If your son came home and said, Daddy, there's a boy sitting opposite me dressed in a
if he told me, yes, I would notice then. But if I'm just dropping the children off at school, which I don't do the school run most often, it's normally done by my wife or nanny, but I don't think I would be inspecting the dress of the children going in. It wouldn't bother me. Okay. It's a matter for the boys' parents or the girls' parents.
Roy's in Folkestone. You're through to Mr. Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, Roy.
Good morning, sir.
Hello, good morning.
I'm a retired Royal Air Force veteran of 32 years. And
God bless you, sir.
Well, thank you for your service to the country.
Well, 32 years at various dangerous places, and history tells me we've had trouble with the Spanish Armada.
Well, we won't go that far back. Can I move you to your actual question? I think it's about Europe, is that right, Roy?
Yes.
What is your question, sir?
What is your opinion about the United States of Europe?
Oh, Roy, great question. It's the front page of one of the newspapers, the Daily Telegraph, today. I've been looking forward. Thank you very much indeed, Roy, for Mr. Rees-Mogg's A United States of Europe, Jean-Claude Juncker's goal.
Well, I think The Sun has said this morning that the greatest recruiting sergeant for Brexit is neither the LBC broadcaster Nigel Farage nor Boris Johnson, but is Monsieur Jean-Claude Juncker. That I'm just so glad we're leaving and are getting out of the possibility of a United States of Europe, which has always been the plan of the Commission. But if you look at the response of senior European leaders to Monsieur Juncker, I think he's in cloud cuckoo land. I don't think there's any demand for this. And bear in mind, it's happening at a point when the Commission is not only dealing with Brexit, but it's also battling the Hungarian government and the Polish government. There are a lot of tensions within the EU, and I think a United States of Europe, I was about to say it's Mr. Juncker's dream, but it's everyone else's nightmare.
How is Brexit going, though? Some people would point to the value of the pound falling against the euro and the dollar, consumer confidence falling, problems with housing, various other issues, all fuelled by Brexit. What is the reality?
Well, the Treasury, just before the vote, said that if we voted to leave, just voted to leave, didn't leave, there would be an immediate rise in unemployment and sharp economic downturn. None of this has happened. If you heard Sir James Dyson on the radio earlier today, which you wouldn't have done because he was on a competitor channel, if confessed to such things existing, he was so positive about how his business is doing. Some businesses that for other reasons have not been doing well like to blame Brexit, but that's actually an excuse of poor management.
You mentioned some of the Remain campaign. One of the key architects of the Remain campaign was George Osborne. He's been accused, as you're probably aware, this is on the front page of The Times, of extraordinary attack. Now, we know that he's referred to Mrs May, or likened her to the living dead in a second-rate horror film, or a dead woman walking. He's now, apparently, told colleagues at the Evening Standard he won't rest until she, Mrs May, quotes, was chopped up in bags in my freezer.
I hadn't seen that. The sadness of George Osborne is that he is a formidably able man. He served it with distinction as Chancellor of the Exchequer, and he has decided since leaving Parliament to emulate a rather less successful Edward Heath. And I think this type of bitterness and bile ends up making the person who has that bitterness and bile feel resentful and sad, and it's no effect on broader politics, that his firepower diminishes with every bitter outburst. And for so able a man, that is something we should be sad about rather than particularly condemn.
Had he stayed as an MP, he could have been leader of the party, couldn't he?
That's probably one of the reasons he's so upset now.
And as a newspaper editor, and many listeners might not know this, but you're the son of a famous newspaper editor and hugely successful. Your dad used to edit the Times, and for a number of years. How healthy is it that an editor bears a grudge such as this?
Well, it provides some entertainment in the Evening Standard for the political class who find it all quite amusing. I think it's the Evening Standard. It is a local paper. It's not a national paper. I think if it doesn't like Mrs May for bilious reasons, its impact will diminish.
Do you read the Standard?
Very rarely, actually.
Paul's in Bow. Paul, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, good morning. Given that it's gone on record that you don't want to be a future Prime Minister, if you was offered a top cabinet job, what would it be in a future Conservative government?
Well, the thing is, that's not going to happen either. There was a wonderful interview done by Ian Dale of this station with Mrs May, the Prime Minister, and she was asked if she would make me a cabinet minister, and I think she laughed for the longest amount of time she's laughed since the general election. So I was delighted to bring some happiness and joy to our distinguished Prime Minister, but that's how seriously she takes it.
So if Paul was to press you, you're just not going to venture down that path?
It's not going to happen, and I think it. Look, I love being an MP for North East Somerset. Somerset is of tremendous importance to me as a county. I'm desperately sentimental about Somerset, but it is a wonderful place to represent, an honour to represent 70,000 voters of North East Somerset.
Why did you want to have its own time zone?
Oh, that was a joke.
Oh, it was? Oh, right.
But it's very dangerous to tell jokes in politics.
Thanks, Paul. Carl in Tamworth, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, Carl. Morning.
Hi there, Jacob.
Hello.
Hi there. Is there anything within Article 50 or any of the treaties, for that matter, that specifically state the UK has to financially meet a final settlement figure when leaving?
Your question is of great importance because the answer is no. If we leave under Article 50 without a deal, under UK, EU and international law, we owe no money at all, not a brass farthing. And there was an excellent House of Lords report in March this year that went through the whole legal situation with great clarity, and nobody has disputed this. So you, sir, are absolutely right. If we leave without a deal, we don't owe anything.
Carl, a quick response to that?
Yeah, that's what I suspected, to be
Right.
perfectly honest with you. Can I ask another quick question?
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, because it allows Mr. Rees-Mogg to have a sip of tea or coffee, whichever is his preference, and that's quite right.
Coffee.
Coffee. OK, so go ahead, Carl, ask your question.
OK, secondly, once all EU law and regulatory powers are transferred back into Parliament or under UK control, let's say, wouldn't it be far more beneficial for the UK to negotiate Brexit from within WTO and not as a member of the EU?
It depends on the way the deal is going. What I would be very against is what the EU wants us to do, which is that we should agree to pay them some money, and then once we've done that, and possibly even left, we should do a trade deal. If we do that, we have used our strongest card before we've got anything out of them. So any deal, I think, has to be comprehensive, but if we leave and pay no money, then our position to negotiate a free trade deal is good, because we import so much more from them than they do from us.
Carl, thank you. Another question. David in Norwich, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Go ahead, David. Morning, sir.
Good morning, sir. Privileged to speak to you both.
Thank you.
Question really, the mass of the silent majority in this country would ask, what would be your views still on the radical Islamification that's spreading across Europe and into the UK, and what we should actually do here in the UK to actually deal with it?
Well, I think we need intelligence. We need to ensure that MI5 and MI6 are fully funded so that we can track down extremists. We need to differentiate between the vast bulk of Muslims who are no threat to us, are good British citizens. And this was an issue Catholic faced in previous centuries. It was thought that no Catholic could be a proper patriotic Englishman. And that was an error. It was untrue. And I wouldn't want us to see us make the same error about the Muslim population today, but we have to get intelligence, we have to get understanding of the motivations, and we have to help defeat organisations like ISIS that are a threat to us.
Quick response from you, David, before I move on.
No, I fully agree, but would that mean strengthening border controls and checking people actually coming into this country?
I think we should check people both in and out so that we have a vague idea of who's here.
To the emails, thank you for that, David. To the emails for a couple of questions, Mr. Rees-Mogg. Graham and Bushy, credit to you, you've been honest and open about your religious beliefs. Tim Fallon was not. Should MPs be more honest about this?
People have to make their own choice. It's easy for me because I'm backbench MP and I'm answerable to the people of North East Somerset. I'm not the leader of a party and therefore I'm not subject to those particular strains. But the line, what profiteth a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul, applies to politicians as much as to anybody else.
The candour you showed in that television interview and some fairly hard-hitting comments and articles in some of the newspapers, does it ever wound you?
No. Sticks and stones can break my bones, but words can never harm me.
Do you really believe that?
I really believe that. There's no point in being in politics if every criticism is wounding, that you must expect, if you express views, that people will disagree, and that some people will disagree in a personal fashion. But that's their right in a free country, and free speech is important when it's for you, but it's also important when it's against you.
Rachel in Bexley, in a post-Brexit Britain, is Jacob Rees-Mogg happy to have his chickens washed with chlorine?
Oh, yes, as it happens, because I've been to America many times and have no doubt eaten lots of chlorine-washed chicken. But I looked into this, and I read the report produced by New Zealand when they were doing their free trade deal with the United States. And it looked at the health effects of washing chicken in chlorine. And it discovered that there had been no health effect for any consumer ever. The only people who had ever been affected were the inspectors who went round to see how it had been done, who got rather too much chlorine. So it's not something we need to worry about. But I'd add further.
Yes.
The US is the most litigious society in the world. If chlorine-washed chicken was dangerous, there would have been billion-pound, billion-dollar lawsuits going on. US regulations are very high, and I quite like the idea of the germs on chickens being killed. I think that's broadly a good idea.
Niall in Bristol, you're through to Jacob Rees-Mogg. Good morning.
Good morning. My question is about Northern Ireland and the border and what Mr. Mogg sees happening there and how that can be resolved in a way that will suit everybody, because it's a very fragile place.
How do we have a border in Northern, or do we have a hard border? Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Well, I think we simply say we're not going to have a border, and we don't put one up. You see, once we've left the European Union, we no longer have to do what the European Union tells us.
But this is where we literally face with the European Union.
Well, then we leave the European Union to say the Republic of Ireland must put in a border. And the Republic of Ireland will say no.
Right.
And they can take the Republic of Ireland to the European Court of Justice. And they can get the European Court of Justice to fine the Republic of Ireland for not putting in a border. But you just let them try. That if you really think the Republic of Ireland will, of its own volition, even under orders from the great Monsieur Juncker, build a wall, I think you've got another thing coming. And we have no obligation to impose any border at all. And to be perfectly honest, if a little bit of Guinness is smuggled over the border, I don't mind.
About people?
People aren't a problem at all, because to work in this country, your employer has to check your status. To rent a property, likewise. To open a bank account, they want to see your passport. Those checks aren't at the border. if you want to come in illegally and overstay your permit, come via Heathrow.
But you're for a robust border at Calais, I would have thought. Dover and Calais.
But if you come in via Heathrow, you can overstay your visitor pass easily.
Right.
So why would you go to the trouble of going into Dublin, across to Belfast?
Because you're illegal.
But if you're illegal, you come in on a tourist visa.
But you're a terrorist.
You have to get in to the Republic of Ireland from the first place.
Yeah.
And the Republic of Ireland is not willy-nilly letting in terrorists. And we've had a common travel zone with the Republic of Ireland long before we were a member of the European Union. So I don't think the border control issue is the problem it's been written up as.
Quick response from you, Niall in Bristol. Back to you.
I think it sounds like you're passing the realm of responsibility around, saying it's not our problem, it's Ireland's problem.
But it is. It's the European Union's problem. We don't want a border. We're not going to put one in. Let them do it if they dare.
Last line from you, Niall.
I would say it sounds like you're either, you either want Ireland to put in a border or you're happy for an open border with an EU country.
I am happy for an open border with the Republic of Ireland.
Perfectly frank on the point. Niall, thank you. Keith in Guildford. You're on the radio, Keith. Good morning.
Good morning, Nick. And
hello, sir.
Good morning.
What I just asked Mr. Mogg is how he feels about being in a government that has seen the introduction of food banks throughout our country, because people can't get by, and also the chronic housing shortage. And yes, of course, subsequent governments fallen down on that, but when it comes to these food banks, that's straight at the door of the Tories. And say the children now work in this country, not in Africa. When I grew up, they were working in Africa.
Well, I don't agree with your analysis. Let me deal with housing first of all, because that's very straightforward, and I'm in more agreement with you. On housing, there has been a desperate short of house building now going back over decades, and we need to put that right. We need a large house building programme, and I think politicians of all parties accept that. On food banks predate the Conservative government, and crucially, the change that took place was that the Conservative government allowed Job Centre Plus to tell people that food banks existed, and the former Labour government would not tell them, and that was a policy decision to stop people knowing that there was help available. And I don't think the state can do everything. That it tries, and it provides a base of welfare that should allow people to make ends meet during the course of the week, but on some occasions that will not work. And to have charitable support given by people voluntarily to support their fellow citizens, I think is rather uplifting and shows what a good, compassionate country we are. And as I say, inevitably the state can't do everything. So I think that there is good within food banks, and the real reason for the rise in numbers is that people know that they're there, and Labour deliberately wouldn't tell them.
So they choose to use food banks where perhaps they could shop themselves?
No, I think they found that life was very tough beforehand.
Right.
And I think there is a need for some private charity on top of what the state provides. But what the government has presided over, it's always hard to say has done, because jobs aren't created by governments, they're created by businesses. It's created 3 million more jobs since 2010, and the best way out of poverty is through employment. We know that from every study that's ever been done.
Almost time to let you go. Just to comment on a couple of stories in today's papers. Women can now purchase the morning after pill for just £4.99. They can store it at home in case of need through an online pharmacy. Jacob Rees.
I think that is a great sadness.
Because?
Because life begins at the point of conception.
The same points you said before. We have the terrible problems in the British Virgin Islands and Anguilla and elsewhere, and it's now revealed that the money that is needed, and we're talking tens of millions of pounds, cannot come out of the foreign aid budget. You're probably aware of this story.
I am.
Yes, your reaction to this?
I think our foreign aid budget is lunatic. We spend money on the Ethiopian Spice Girls, all sorts of junk. We chuck money out of the door in November and December to meet this absurd, arbitrary target no other country tries to meet. We have a large deficit. I'm all in favour of this type of aid, of emergency aid, when countries are in trouble. And then it doesn't matter whether it's the British Virgin Islands or it's Bangladesh. It doesn't matter if we're helping in Italy when there's this sort of crisis. This is when the British people want to help a foreign country, but to have arbitrary targets and absurd regulations is pure tokenism of government and is not proper government policy.
Why are Prime Ministers tied to this extraordinary level of spending, do you imagine?
Well, I think it's popular with your listeners, but I don't think it is.
It's not. It really is.
I tried to filibuster the bill to put the 0.7% into law, and it was a filibuster that didn't work. So people have a go at me for filibustering from time to time. But on this, I think I was on the side of most of the British people.
And lastly, a bit of a test. You'd expect this, Mr.
No.
Don't worry.
Tests are impossible.
You say you like chicken. Earlier this month, you told a gathering in the City of London's Gherkin Tower, reports the Times newspaper, a paper close to your heart, that although you're a fan of the building, you're not a fan of having gherkins in your McDonald's quarter-pounders. That set me thinking. Jacob Rees-Mogg, what does a McDonald's quarter-pounder cost?
Right, I haven't a clue, but I can tell you when I last had one. I last had one at the Tory Party conference 3 years ago. There was a very convenient walk-through from the conference centre to my hotel. I think Mrs. Rees-Mogg was less than impressed when I took her there for dinner. But as an occasion...
You took her there for dinner?
Well, we'd had quite a long day, and it was getting quite late, but we hadn't eaten. And I think for good, quick, and perfectly edible food, it's not bad, but I wouldn't want to give the impression that I'm a very regular customer.
OK. A quarter-pounder with cheese, large fries and a strawberry milkshake is £5.59.
But I don't like cheese on it either. So
you don't have cheese? No cheese. No. All right. Thank you very much for seeing Jacob.
Great pleasure.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. The man behind Mogmentum and Conservative MP for North East Somerset, appearing here on LBC when news is next.
On FM, online, on your mobile and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is